The text came in at 11:47 on a Thursday night. Kimmy wasn't even supposed to be awake. She had a 6 a.m. call with investors in Singapore, a pitch deck still open on her laptop, and half a glass of red wine sitting on the nightstand like a forgotten apology. But her phone lit up with a name she hadn't seen in almost 4 years, Veronica Hayes, and something about the timestamp made her sit up. She read it once. Then she read it again. "Girl, you need to see what Luke posted in the alumni group. Don't read it alone." Kimmy's chest tightened. Not because of fear, not even because of surprise, but because she knew the way, when a storm is coming before a single cloud appears, that whatever Luke had posted was going to try to make her small again. And the version of Kimmy that would have let it, she'd buried that woman a long time ago. She opened the group. She found the post. And she felt something she hadn't expected. Not pain, not rage. She felt ready. Before we go any further, if you are new here, welcome. Hit that subscribe button right now, because the stories we tell on this channel are not just entertainment, they are mirrors. And you are going to want to stay for what happens next. Kimmy Lawson grew up in a house on the east side of Atlanta where the water pressure was inconsistent and the Wi-Fi was borrowed from the neighbor 2 doors down. Her mother, Diane, worked double shifts at the county hospital, not as a doctor, not as a nurse, but as a unit secretary who knew every patient's name, every family member's face, and every doctor's coffee order. Diane did not complain. She did not theorize about what life owed her. She simply worked, and she prayed, and she made sure Kimmy's uniform was pressed every single morning. Kimmy was the kind of girl who sat in the front row, not because she was eager to impress, but because she was hungry. Not metaphorically, sometimes literally, on days when lunch money had been redirected toward the electric bill. But she carried that hunger differently than most. She didn't let it make her bitter. She let it make her sharp. Jefferson High School was the kind of place where reputation was currency and social capital moved, like a stock market, volatile, ruthless, and deeply unfair. The kids whose parents had the right jobs, the right addresses, the right cars in the parking lot, they set the tone. And the kids who didn't have those things learned early to either perform confidence they didn't own or accept the role they'd been assigned. Kimmy refused both. She joined the debate team. She tutored seniors in calculus. She won a regional essay competition on economic policy that was featured in the school newsletter, which most people didn't read. But she saved a copy anyway. She wasn't popular. She wasn't flashy. But she was undeniable to anyone paying attention. Luke Crawford was not paying attention. Luke was the kind of guy who took up space like it was a birthright. Broad shoulders, easy smile, sneakers that cost more than Kimmy's mother's weekly paycheck. His father ran a car dealership in Buckhead, and his mother sat on 2 nonprofit boards, which meant Luke had grown up believing that the world was a place that naturally bent in his direction. And so far, it had. He wasn't cruel. That's what made it complicated. He wasn't the kind of boy who set out to hurt people. He was just the kind of boy who never considered that the people around him could be hurt because in his world, nobody was fragile. Everyone had a cushion. Everyone had options. He moved through Jefferson High like someone who had never once had to wonder if there would be enough. He and Kimmy crossed paths junior year in AP Economics, a class that Kimmy had signed up for because she was serious, and that Luke had signed up for because his father told him it would look good for college applications. The first time Luke spoke to Kimmy directly, it was to borrow a pencil. The second time, it was to ask her to explain the difference between fiscal and monetary policy the night before the midterm. By spring of junior year, they were studying together twice a week. By fall of senior year, somehow, impossibly, they were in love. Or at least Kimmy was in love. And Luke was in something that felt enough like love that he didn't question it. They got married young, too young, most people said, though they said it in the careful, diplomatic way that means we think this is a mistake, but we don't want to be blamed later. Kimmy was 22, fresh out of her first year at Georgia State, studying finance. Luke was 23, working at his father's dealership, comfortable and unambitious in the way that only people who have never needed to be ambitious can be. Their wedding was small, Diane cried. Luke's parents smiled the tight, polished smile of people who had expected better for their son and had decided to make peace with it. Kimmy's best friend Veronica, who had known Kimmy since the 7th grade, who had shared lunches and secrets and heartbreak with her across a decade, stood at the altar beside her and whispered, "You sure?" Kimmy had smiled. "I'm sure about me. That's enough." The first 2 years were fine. Not extraordinary fine. They lived in a one-bedroom apartment in Decatur. Kimmy worked part-time and studied full-time. Luke sold cars and came home tired and spent his weekends watching football and calling that rest. He wasn't mean. He wasn't unfaithful, not that Kimmy ever found out, anyway. He was simply indifferent to her growth in a way that became suffocating over time. When Kimmy got a summer internship at a wealth management firm downtown, Luke said, "That's cool, babe," and turned back to the game. When Kimmy told him she'd been offered a full-time position upon graduation with a salary that would more than double their combined income, Luke said, "I guess that means you'll be busy." When Kimmy started staying late at the office, networking, attending professional dinners, building the kind of relationships that open doors that most people never even know exist, Luke started making comments. Small ones at first. "You're always working." Then sharper. "You think you're too good for regular life now?" Then, finally, the one that cracked something open in Kimmy's chest. "I don't know who you're trying to become, but she's not who I married." She filed for divorce 6 months later. Luke was blindsided, which said everything. Kimmy walked out of that courthouse with her maiden name, her Series 7 license, and the absolute, crystalline certainty that she had not left a marriage, she had escaped a ceiling. The years after the divorce were not glamorous. Let nobody lie to you about what it looks like to rebuild your life from the inside out. It is quiet. It is repetitive. It is choosing the hard thing on days when the easy thing is right there, calling your name. Kimmy moved into a studio apartment in Midtown and she treated it like a monastery. She woke up at 5:30. She read. She studied for her CFP certification. She took on every client that her firm would give her, and she studied each one's portfolio like it was a test she intended to ace. She was not doing it to prove something to Luke. She had already stopped thinking about Luke. She was doing it because she had made a promise to the girl who borrowed Wi-Fi from 2 doors down. The girl whose uniform was always pressed. The girl who sat in the front row because she was hungry. She was not going to let that girl down. Veronica was there for all of it. She showed up with food and opinions and the particular brand of love that only a best friend who has known you since 7th grade can offer, unsentimental, unsparing, and absolute. It was Veronica who talked Kimmy out of a spiral at 2 in the morning after the divorce was finalized. It was Veronica who drove her to her first post-divorce client dinner and sat in the parking lot texting encouragement. It was Veronica who said 3 years later, with wide eyes and a slow smile, "I need to introduce you to someone." His name was Marcus Webb. Marcus Webb was not a flashy man. He was quiet in the way that confident people are quiet, not because they have nothing to say, but because they have learned that the room always comes to them eventually. He was 41, never married, with the kind of stillness that Kimmy first mistook for aloofness and later recognized as peace. He had founded his first tech company at 26, a logistics software firm that he'd sold 8 years later for more money than Kimmy's entire division managed in a quarter. He'd used the proceeds to start a second company, then a third, and had quietly become one of the most influential black tech entrepreneurs in the Southeast, not through self-promotion or social media performance, but through work that spoke so loudly it didn't need an amplifier. He was also, and this part matters for reasons that will become clear deeply, specifically uninterested in impressing anyone. He and Kimmy met at a charity gala that Veronica had technically dragged Kimmy to. Marcus had been seated at their table. He hadn't introduced himself with his company name or his net worth or any of the performance that rich men at charity galas typically lead with. He had introduced himself with a question, "What do you actually care about?" Kimmy had blinked. "Excuse me? At work, not what your job description says. What do you actually care about?" She had answered honestly, more honestly than she'd been with anyone in years, because something about his directness had short-circuited her usual armor. She told him about the financial literacy workshops she'd started running for young women in her neighborhood on Saturday mornings. She told him about her mother's generation, how so many black women her mother's age had worked their entire lives without ever building wealth because no one had ever taught them how. She told him that she didn't just want to manage money for rich people, she wanted to change who got to be a rich person. Marcus had listened to every word. Then he'd said, "So do I." They were married 18 months later. Private ceremony. 50 people. Diane cried again, but differently this time, the kind of crying that is made of relief and recognition. Veronica was maid of honor again, and this time, when she whispered, "You sure?" At the altar, Kimmy didn't smile. She just said, "Yes." Jefferson High School's 15-year reunion was held on a Friday evening in September at the Ritz-Carlton in Buckhead, a venue that told you everything you needed to know about the aspirations of the organizing committee. The invitation had been sitting in Kimmy's email for 6 weeks, unanswered. She'd been busy. She was always busy, but more than that, she simply hadn't decided if she wanted to go. It was Marcus who had settled it. Go, he'd said, simply. You've earned every right to walk into that room. She went. Marcus did not go with her. He was traveling for work, closing a deal in Dubai, but Veronica went, because Veronica would not have missed it for anything on earth. They arrived together, in the kind of understated elegance that required no explanation. Kimmy wore a deep burgundy dress, her hair natural and framed perfectly, her only jewelry a thin gold bracelet that Marcus had given her on their first anniversary. Veronica wore cobalt blue and the look of a woman who had been waiting for this evening for 15 years. The event was what reunions always are, a performance of adulthood staged over past appetizers and an open bar. People clustered in their old formations, pretending those formations no longer mattered while demonstrating quite clearly that they did. Name tags with senior yearbook photos created a strange, disorienting effect. You kept seeing the ghost of who someone had been superimposed over who they had become. Kimmy moved through the room easily. She had been nervous in the car, but the nerves had dissolved the moment she walked in, replaced by something cleaner clarity. She was not here to compete. She was not here to perform. She was here because 15 years ago, this place had been the whole world, and she wanted to stand in the ruins of that world and confirm, once and for all, that she had built something better. She saw Luke from across the room. He was wearing a blue blazer that didn't quite fit and holding a glass of whiskey with the careful posture of a man who wanted to appear relaxed. He'd gained weight, not dramatically, but enough to suggest that the years had been comfortable in the sedentary, unchallenged way. He was talking loudly, laughing at his own jokes, commanding a small circle of people the way he always had by sheer gravitational confidence. The kind that doesn't require anything earned to sustain itself. He saw her, too. And something shifted in his face, something she recognized. It was the look of a man recalculating. It happened in stages, the way these things always do when someone is performing for an audience. The first stage was the approach, Luke crossing the room with his whiskey and his smile, arms wide. "Kimmy Lawson, look at you!" As though they had parted as friends, as though the words, "who you're trying to become is not who I married," had never existed. The second stage was the small talk, which became subtly competitive in the way that small talk at reunions always does. "What are you doing now?" "Oh, you're in finance? That's great, that's great. I'm actually expanding the dealership. My father stepped back, so I'm running the whole operation now. We just brought on 12 new employees this year." The third stage, the one Kimmy had not predicted, the one that transformed an awkward reunion conversation into something that would be screenshotted and shared across the alumni group at 11:47 on a Thursday night, happened when someone in the group asked, laughing, "So, Luke, you and Kimmy used to date, right? What's the story there?" And Luke, emboldened by whiskey and audience, had smiled the smile of a man who believes himself untouchable. He'd looked at Kimmy, looked right at her, and said, "Kimmy was a good girl, smart, you know, but some women get a little too focused on the come-up. She was always chasing something. Honestly, I think she just didn't know how to be a wife. I gave her everything, and it still wasn't enough." He said it pleasantly. That was the worst part. He said it like a man sharing an amusing anecdote about a car that had given him trouble. The circle went quiet in the way that circles go quiet when everyone is suddenly aware that something has happened, something that requires a response no one knows how to make. Kimmy looked at Luke for a long moment. Not with anger, not with hurt, with the serene, almost clinical calm of a woman who has spent years building something that cannot be taken from her by a man with a blazer that doesn't fit. Then she smiled. "That's one version of the story," she said simply. And she turned and walked toward the bar. Luke, apparently, had not found satisfaction in her non-reaction, because later that night, likely in the parking lot, likely still holding the whiskey, likely in the company of the specific type of ego that requires an audience. Even when the audience has gone home, he had opened the Jefferson High Alumni Facebook group and posted, "Ran into my ex-wife tonight at the reunion, LOL. Some things don't change. She was always more interested in impressing people than in building a real life. Hope she finds what she's looking for. No hard feelings." 43 people had reacted before midnight. It was the 31st comment that changed everything. It came from Derek Washington, who had been in their AP economics class, who now worked in tech in San Francisco, and who had apparently kept up with the news in ways that Luke had not. Derek's comment was not long. It read, "Bro, did you just post about Kimmy Lawson, as in Kimmy Webb? As in married to Marcus Webb? The Marcus Webb?" The comments that followed Derek's were a study in collective realization. People who had been at the reunion began comparing notes. People who hadn't been there began tagging people who had. Someone posted a link to a Forbes feature from 2 years ago, The Quiet Architect, How Marcus Webb is Reshaping Black Wealth in America. And in the third paragraph, there was a line that mentioned his wife, Kimmy Webb, a certified financial planner and founder of the Lawson Financial Literacy Initiative, which has served over 4,000 women across Georgia. Someone found the photo from the gala where Kimmy and Marcus had been named co-recipients of a Community Impact Award. Someone else found the profile piece in Atlanta magazine. Someone found the announcement of the endowed scholarship in Kimmy's mother's name at Georgia State. By morning, Luke's post had 187 comments. He had deleted it by 9 a.m. It didn't matter. Veronica had screenshotted everything. When Veronica texted Kimmy, "Girl, you need to see what Luke posted in the alumni group. Don't read it alone." Kimmy had already been awake for an hour. She read the screenshots that Veronica sent. She read every comment. She read the moment the room had turned, the moment people had started to understand the scale of what Luke had dismissed. She set her phone face down on the nightstand. She finished her glass of wine. She picked up her phone again, not to respond to anything in the alumni group, not to post anything, not to defend herself, but to call Marcus, who was 12 hours ahead in Dubai, and who picked up on the second ring. "Hey," she said, "how'd the meeting go?" "Closed it," he said. "You okay? You're calling late." "I'm good," she said, and she meant it. "I just wanted to hear your voice." Luke Crawford did not have a dramatic fall from grace. That would have been too neat, too cinematic. What he had was something more mundane and in some ways more devastating. He had a long, uncomfortable week. His phone, which had been the instrument of his humiliation, became the instrument of his education. Mutual friends texted. Cousins who were in the alumni group called. A college buddy who worked in Atlanta's business community sent a carefully worded message that essentially said, "You should probably know who she married before you talk like that publicly." He Googled Marcus Webb. He read the Forbes piece. He found the Atlanta magazine profile, which included a photograph of Kimmy and Marcus at a gala. Kimmy in a white gown, laughing at something, entirely radiant, standing beside a man who looked at her the way Luke had never learned to look at anyone. He read the paragraph about Kimmy's financial literacy initiative. He read that she had served over 4,000 women. He read that she had been invited to testify before the Georgia State Legislature on financial education policy. He read that she and Marcus had just announced a $2 million endowment to Georgia State's business school. He sat with all of it. And then, and this is the part that no one else saw, the part that happened in the privacy of a man who was finally, painfully, reckoning with himself, he sat with the specific kind of shame that comes not from being caught, but from understanding. From finally understanding what you had and what you did with it. He had looked at Kimmy Lawson and seen a woman chasing something she didn't have. He had never once considered that she was building something he couldn't imagine. He had called it ambition, like it was a flaw. He had called it distraction, like it was a betrayal. He had stood in a reunion ballroom and mocked her in front of people who were now reading about her in Forbes. He had been the ceiling. He sat with that for a long time. Kimmy never posted anything in the alumni group. She never sent Luke a message. She never addressed the situation publicly, never gave an interview about it, never let it become a narrative she performed for an audience. Veronica, who absolutely would have, was discouraged from posting on Kimmy's behalf. "It's already done," Kimmy told her. The story told itself. What Kimmy did instead was wake up on Saturday morning and drive to the community center in her old East Atlanta neighborhood, the same neighborhood where she'd grown up borrowing Wi-Fi from 2 doors down, and she ran her financial literacy workshop. 12 women showed up that morning, ranging in age from 23 to 61. One of them was a recently divorced single mother who was learning to manage her finances for the first time. One of them was a 61-year-old woman who reminded Kimmy so much of her mother that she had to take a breath before she could begin. She taught them about compound interest, about credit scores, about the difference between assets and liabilities, about what it means to build wealth instead of simply spend income. She answered every question. She stayed 2 hours past the scheduled end time because the 61-year-old woman had questions that deserved real answers. When she got back to her car, she had 3 missed calls, none of them from Luke. One from Marcus, one from her mother, one from Veronica. She called Marcus first. "How was it?" he asked. "Really good," she said. "One of the women today. She just got divorced. She's starting over at 34. "Sounds familiar," Marcus said, and she could hear the smile. "It does," she agreed. "I told her the same thing someone should have told me, that starting over is not a punishment, it's a door." Pause for a second, because I want to do something. This story is about reinvention, about what happens when someone bets against you and you just quietly win anyway. And I know that resonates because reinvention looks different depending on where you're from. So here's what I want you to do. Drop your city in the comments below, just your city, and then tell me one word what you're building right now. Not what you have, what you're building. Because I believe the people in this comment section are not just viewers. You are the Kimmies. You are the ones sitting in the front row because you are hungry. And I want to see where you're watching from. Drop your city. One word. Let's build a map of people who refuse to stay in the rooms that couldn't hold them. Veronica Hayes deserves her own paragraph, her own chapter, because she is the kind of friend that every Kimmy needs and not every Kimmy gets. She had been there at the beginning, sharing lunches in the Jefferson High cafeteria, listening to Kimmy talk about economics with a patience born of genuine love rather than genuine interest. She had been there through the marriage, biting her tongue in the careful way that real friends do when they see something concerning, but respect that the decision isn't theirs. She had been there through the divorce, showing up at 2 a.m. with food and her loud, unsubtle personality, and the specific gift of making Kimmy laugh when laughing felt impossible. And she had been the one to introduce Kimmy to Marcus, which she brought up approximately once a month, always with the same casual delivery. "You're welcome, by the way." But what Veronica never brought up, what she kept entirely to herself for years and only told Kimmy much later, on a quiet evening on Kimmy's back porch, was that she had gone back to Luke after the reunion. Not romantically. She had gone back to speak to him, alone, in the parking lot, before the screenshots had even started circulating. "I told him," Veronica said, looking out at the garden, "that he was going to regret what he said tonight. Not because of Marcus, not because of the money or the Forbes article or any of that, but because he had a front row seat to something extraordinary and he spent the whole show looking at his phone." "What did he say?" Kimmy asked. Veronica shrugged. "He said I was being dramatic." Kimmy laughed. "He found out the next morning," Veronica said. "Sometimes that's how it goes. Sometimes the lesson comes after the test. This is the part of the story where I speak directly to you, not as a narrator. As someone who has been thinking about what Kimmy's story means, there is a kind of person who looks at someone else's hunger, their drive, their ambition, their refusal to accept the life that has been handed to them and calls it a flaw, calls it arrogance, calls it not knowing how to be satisfied. These people are not always villains. Sometimes they are people who have simply never had to be hungry. People who have moved through the world on the cushion of inherited comfort and have therefore never developed the muscle memory of desire. They see the woman who wakes up at 5:30 and they think, what is she running from? They cannot conceive that she might be running towards something. Luke was not a monster. He was a man who had been given everything and learned nothing from the receiving of it. And that is its own kind of tragedy, not the dramatic, operatic kind, but the quiet, ordinary kind that plays out in 1,000 marriages, 1,000 relationships, 1,000 moments where someone looks at a person becoming more than expected and instead of celebrating it, feels threatened by it. The lesson is not that ambition is always rewarded. Sometimes it isn't. Sometimes Kimmy's story ends at chapter 2, the divorce and the rebuilding is slow and the recognition never comes. Sometimes the Forbes article doesn't get written and the Marcus Webb doesn't walk into the gala and the 15-year reunion is just a reunion. The lesson is that Kimmy was already free before any of that. She had been free from the moment she filed those divorce papers, free from the ceiling, free from the voice that told her she was chasing something instead of building something, free from the room that could not hold her. The Marcus, the initiative, the endowment, the scholarship in her mother's name, those were not the reward for her survival. They were the expression of who she had always been. Luke's post, his mockery, his dismissal, those did not define her. They revealed him. The most dangerous thing you can do to a person who is building something real is underestimate them. Not because it slows them down, it doesn't, not the ones who are truly building, but because it ensures that when they arrive, you will not be there. Luke was not there. He was in the alumni Facebook group, deleting a post, watching the comments pile up, Googling a man he should have heard about differently as Kimmy's husband, proud and present, instead of as a punchline that had turned on him. And Kimmy was in a community center on the east side of Atlanta, teaching a 61-year-old woman that it was not too late to start, that the door was still open. That hunger, real hunger, the kind born of necessity and desire and the deep, cellular knowledge that you are meant for more than you have been given, was not a flaw. It was a foundation. Kimmy never reached out to Luke. She heard, through the particular grapevine that connects all people who went to the same high school and moved in the same city, that he had made some changes, that he had stepped back from the dealership, that he had enrolled in some kind of leadership program, that he was in a new relationship with someone who seemed good for him. She heard these things and she felt nothing dramatic, nothing like triumph or vindication. She felt the mild, clean warmth of someone who no longer lives in a house that used to hurt them. Hearing that the house has been repainted, she wished him well, not because she owed him that, but because she was the kind of woman who had built something big enough that small things could not diminish it. And Luke Crawford, in the end, was a small thing, a moment in a chapter of a life that had gone on to become extraordinary. The girl who borrowed Wi-Fi from 2 doors down. The girl whose uniform was always pressed. The girl who sat in the front row. She had arrived. And the front row, the real one, the one that mattered, had been worth every single second of the wait. What Kimmy's story teaches us: the world will assign you a ceiling based on your zip code, your upbringing, your relationship history, your past failures. Some people will help enforce that ceiling. They will call your ambition arrogance, your drive distraction, your hunger restlessness. They will do this not out of malice, but out of limitation. They cannot see past what they have been given, and so they cannot imagine what you are building. Your job is not to convince them. Your job is not to perform your transformation for their validation. Your job is to build quietly, consistently, hungrily, and to trust that the work will speak when the time comes. Luke's mistake was not that he underestimated Kimmy. His mistake was that he thought her value was something he could measure. He thought that because he couldn't see what she was building, it wasn't there. He thought that because she wasn't there yet, she wasn't going anywhere. He was wrong. Some of the most dangerous people in the room are the ones who look like they're still figuring it out. Guard your hunger. Protect your vision. Surround yourself with the Veronicas, the ones who show up at 2 a.m., who bite their tongues when necessary, who introduce you to your Marcus when the time is right, and who tell you, gently but firmly, every single day, you were never who they said you were. And if someone ever stands in a room full of people and tries to make you small, let them talk. Then go build something that makes the whole room quiet. If this story moved you, share it with someone who is in their rebuilding season. And don't forget, drop your city in the comments below. One word. What are you building? Let's hear it. See you in the next one.